Welcome to another episode of Art Heals All Wounds. I'm your host, Pam Usel. On this show, we meet artists transforming lives with their work. When was the last time you had a good cry? Recently? Did you cry last week? Yesterday? Maybe this morning? Do you remember the last time you cried? No? Sometimes some of us lose our ability to cry. As children, when we fill with emotions, we let those emotions flow out of us in the form of tears. What happens to those emotions, though, when we don't let them out through tears? Does sorrow turn to anger? Grief to rage? Does the rage come so quickly that we don't even have time to feel our grief? If you've lost your tears, how can you get them back again? These are just some of the questions that writer Tiffany Golden explores in her book, Midnight and the Man Who Had No Tears. Tiffany Golden is the author of the Midnight Story series, a collection of children's chapter stories and coloring books. Her website describes the Midnight Story series as love through literature. She is also the author of the book, Loving Myself with Lupus. On this episode, we'll talk to Tiffany to find out more about these books that spread messages of love and also give examples of courage on how to make it to the other side of hardship. You're listening to Art Heals All Wounds. First up, the art of conversation. You can get more information about this podcast and get in touch with me on the Facebook page, Art Heals All Wounds, and on Twitter and Instagram at Art Heals Podcast. Recently, I read this great article in the New York Times. The title was, "There's a Name for the Blah You're Feeling. It's called Languishing." It talks about a particular state in which it's difficult to focus, difficult to experience pleasure, and the little things that make us happy, like an afternoon walk or our favorite food. And I thought, that's it. That is what I'm feeling. I was so happy to have a name for it, particularly because the word languishing brings to mind something much more romantic than what I'm feeling. Languishing makes me think of something that jilted lovers do in a 19th century novel. Do any of you feel that you're also languishing? And if you are, what ways have you found to achieve flow? Remember, you can leave comments, messages, suggestions for topics, anything you'd like. At Facebook, you can find me at Art Heals All Wounds. And on Instagram and Twitter, it's at Art Heals Podcast. Up next, our deep dive with this episode's guest on Art Heals All Wounds. You're listening to Art Heals All Wounds. Listen and let us inspire you. Usually several times a week, I dream about my mother, who passed away 5 years ago. These dreams aren't like the ones you hear about, where someone you lost appears to you to bring you a message or anything like that. They're usually pretty mundane, and my mom is in them just hanging out. During the dream, everything feels so ordinary, and in the world of the dream, my mom is still alive. It's when I wake up that I realize that she's no longer here. And every time I wish that I realized that during the dream so that I can make more of a point to try to communicate with her in some way. But in each dream, it's always the same. I forget to reach out to her to try and communicate. This is really the frustration of dreams. We can see our desires, but they're often just out of reach, or they shift and change before we can really grasp them. Wouldn't it be great to have some kind of helper in your dreams? Like a guide of some kind that can steer you towards the treasures that your heart is seeking and then bolster you during the parts of the dream that scare you. My next guest, Tiffany Golden, has created a character in her children's book, the Midnight Story series, that is exactly like that. Named Midnight, she is the keeper of dreams and protector of children in the mystical land of Sheena. These stories, along with their beautiful illustrations by Adolfo, are especially geared towards children of African descent. Tiffany, it's so great to see you, and I'm so glad that you're joining me on this podcast. When we met, you were a youngster.
Yes.
How old were you when we met?
I want to say that I was between 19 and 20.
Wow.
Yeah, I was really young.
Yeah. And we met, you were a filmmaker and a very talented one. Actually, when I think that you were making the films that you were making at that age, I'm sort of in awe. You made that beautiful black and white film where you did a lot of shooting out at the ocean, and it was just so gorgeous and so heartfelt and very mature themes for someone who is between 19 and 20. So that's my first memory and impression of you.
Yeah, Sweet Natalie was the name of that film. And it was a film about a man who had lost his wife, and he was grieving and trying to find a way to go on. I think that was like me trying to deal with like the fragility of manhood. Like I sensed something about that.
Yeah.
And quite honestly, I was in love with that guy that was in my film. I was like bonkers about him.
That rings a bell. He was very handsome. I do remember that.
I had the hugest crush on him. Huge.
Well, with good reason. I do remember him being very, very handsome.
He was.
Yes.
And so I was like, do you want to be in my film? Because I was so socially awkward. I was like, do you want to be in my film?
Oh, that's the greatest pickup line ever, though. Well, so what are you doing now?
Now I am writing children's books. So I'm writing some picture books, and I'm mostly writing middle grade novels. And I'm also teaching creative writing to 3rd to 8th graders through an organization that I work with called Chapter 510 in the Department of Make Believe in Oakland.
Oh, I know them. I love their poetry that I've seen.
Yeah, so I teach their picture book classes, and I've taught a novel writing workshop with them. And we taught a songwriting one where we made an album.
Wow.
And now I'm teaching elementary musical. We're making a musical. I'm working with a musician called Eli Wise. And with my middle schoolers, they're writing screenplays.
Wow.
It all comes back.
Yeah. This transition from being a filmmaker to a writer, I'm really curious about it. Talk about how that came about for you. When did you decide I'm going to start writing as opposed to primarily being a filmmaker, and why?
Well, I think for me, my body made the decision for me.
Oh.
When we met, I was really into like production, and they would be like grueling schedules and things like that. And I was doing a lot of PA work, which is the hardest.
Right.
But I also developed my autoimmune condition called lupus, and rheumatoid arthritis were starting to show up. So I was having flares in between those shoots, and it was taking me a little bit of time to recuperate from them. Mm-hmm. So I had to start thinking about something that was less hard on my body.
Right.
And writing was a natural transition. I really liked writing. And then I went on this long, swirly road of, I'm going to find every career that I'm interested in for like 10 and a half years. And then I'm going to finally settle on writing.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm thinking that your first Midnight book, Midnight and the Man Who Had No Tears, was the first book that you published. Is that true? That was the first one?
Yes, it is.
I really wanted to talk to you about all of your writing, but I wanted to sort of break down that book and also the because there are 2 books about Midnight. Is that true? I want to break down the series and the books because they are fascinating reading. I mean, they're beautiful reading. And I'm wondering if you could talk about this character. How did you come up with this character? And can you describe Midnight?
Yes. So I had a cousin named Jade Shepherd who had went missing in West Oakland. And she was found, but she had suffered a violent death.
Oh my gosh.
And so it was the first death of someone younger than me I had experienced, and someone that I had known for a long time.
Right.
And I don't deal with death well anyway. So it's not like something I'm like very versed in. I'm terrible at death. So I wanted to find a way to honor her. So I started to make dolls of people who had passed away.
Wow.
So I would get a picture of someone, or I would have people commission me, and I would embroider their face on a like rag doll body type. And then I would try to make the clothes and send it to people. So that became a practice of mine.
Wow.
And from there, I wanted to make dolls that really honored Black people in all of the shades we come in, just, all of the magic that we have. And then one night I dreamt of one of the dolls, and the doll revealed herself to me as Midnight.
Wow.
And she, of all the dolls, she had this energy to her that was just beautiful. And she had a lot of hair, and it was really dark, and her skin was very dark, and it was very beautiful. And just talking about it now, I think that it's reminiscent of some of the paintings my dad used to do. He used to do these paintings of these beautifully dark women that would hang up all in our house. So Midnight's complexion was like that. And so just thinking now that that's also something that influenced me was my father's art that used to hang up on our house and in my grandparents' houses.
Your stories take place in this, I would say, a mythical land named Sheena.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering if you can just kind of give us the setting of Sheena and then what Midnight's role is in Sheena.
So Sheena is in Swahili, I believe it was. It's a long time since I've written it. It means the root. So I imagine this land that was kind of like a yam, where there's all this West African connections and things like that. And I think that being Black in America specifically, there are so many cut ties culturally that we have to our motherland and our ancestry. Right. And, not everyone experiences that, but enough of us do, in mass, to where there's this sense of this forced adoption that we've had here in America. You know what I mean? Yeah. So there's this I've heard people who are adopted say that they have this family that they're with now, but there's always a part of them that imagines what their birth family would have been like in this life that they would have had.
Right.
So Sheena really represents this utopic society, African diasporic society, this amalgam of all the things that would be had our history not been interrupted.
Wow.
The difficulty with that is that no place would have been perfect.
Right.
And so in developing these stories, there's this utopia, but then when we look closer, there's always something wrong. There's always something going on. So the idea of the utopia in theory, but in practice.
So what is Midnight's role in Sheena?
So Midnight is the keeper of dreams and the protector of children. Mm. And her calling or her life's work is to gather all of the children once they're not toddlers anymore. So like once they're like, 5, when they're a little bit more independent, to like 7, 8, before they get double digits. And she gathers them every night and she takes them to a Sealy, which is kind of like heaven. So they go on this journey, they sleep with her on the boat, and then all of the love and light of the land and all of the, I guess would be angels. The spirits just kind of bless them so that they have this safe childhood and can grow up and be adults who are contributing and grounded and they got their stuff right.
Yeah. And it sounds idyllic. When I read your book, I just thought, oh, I want to be a kid sleeping on that boat. It sounded fantastic. And then they go to, it's called a Sealy.
Mm-hmm. So they just get all these little, I haven't gone, like in the books yet, we haven't like actually been to a Sealy. So
there's a goal though.
Yeah, it's always a goal, but something always happens to where like we're not at Sealy quite yet.
But they're going to receive blessings there, aren't they?
They're going to receive blessings and they receive the magic. They receive magic magic and joy. And that when they come back, they share that with the adults who forget about that magic.
Right.
And,
oh my gosh.
Yeah. If you've ever been around a kid.
Exactly. It is true. Their world is magical and we have lost that. That's so true. Oh my gosh. When I read this, I just thought like a very visual person wrote this. Mm. The one thing that really like stuck out to me was the scene where Midnight and what is the father's name? Ali when they step into this, it's like a pool in a cave and it's tears. And I could just see that. It just was, and there are a lot of things in there that I could see, but that one really struck me. And that's this first book, Midnight and the Man Who Had No Tears. You say that something always happens so that they don't quite get to a Sealy, but in this, she has to help the father of a new little boy find his tears. So why this story? What was important about the tears? I mean, I know why it's important in the story, but how did you think of that and why did you think of that?
Well, I had been teaching at that time for about 10 years. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you've experienced this teaching, where you do all this work with the young people to create a safe environment and to build trust. And then the parents would come in and they would just like undo all that. And it's like verbally abusive. It's like, it's all for nothing. And so, I wanted to say that it goes back even a little bit further. I think now we know more like about collective trauma and we know more about it's not so much about this, what's the word I want to say? This nuclear family, but it's really about a collective experience. And specifically with Black folks, we have these collective traumas that pop up a little bit differently.
Right.
But there is, together, we have so many deep traumas that throughout our centuries here, specifically in America, we haven't had an opportunity to collectively heal. People have been working on healing. People have been working towards justice and making steps towards justice. But I think as a monolith, we haven't had collective healing that way. And like retribute, like we haven't had that. And I think it's something that, you know, I wanted these books to say that we can imagine what that looks like. We can imagine what healing looks like in a way that's meaningful for us outside of the context of a country that doesn't love us. There are people in the country that love us, but the country itself doesn't love us. You know what I mean?
I do. And I feel like, this is even a hard 2 weeks to talk about this theme because, you know, police killings of Black and brown people is not new, but right. It feels like it's been on steroids. You know, we're awaiting this outcome of the Derek Chauvin trial. And then in the meantime, all these stories are coming up of more Black men being killed by police. And it becomes really distressing even if you're not Black.
Yeah. And
I'm not sure that I can imagine what it feels like if you are.
It is, you know, our family has been, and you probably have seen pictures of my nephew on,
yes.
And one of the manuscripts that is being queried by my agent now, I had a hard time writing because I had to imagine telling this 5-year-old that there's a world that don't love him. And I love him with all my heart, with everything I have. But there's a whole system in place that doesn't want, I mean, and just to have to tell somebody that, have to, for their own safety, so that they don't get it twisted in their mind that it's not true.
Right.
That they won't be shocked at how the rest of the world sees them.
Right.
To have to be the one who destroys a little bit of their childhood when they're a baby still is one of the most messed up things that this country makes Black people have to do for our children. And it's hard.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I don't think I've ever really had someone explain that to me in that way before. So this is a book that you also wrote about this particular.
Yeah. So I have a manuscript that's, like I say, is being queried now. Just about a young boy trying to find what he can do in all of this.
Right.
And so he's trying to exercise some agency and figure out what to do with all of his pain. And it centers around George Floyd.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, he's saying that George Floyd looks like my dad, and I look like my dad. And just that whole, you know, thing of seeing yourself in something that's happening that's harmful and hurtful, and how do you find power and agency and voice in that hard moment.
Right. Wow. Is it, what age group is this book geared for?
Like 7 to 9.
Wow. That is a tough topic. But as you said, this is something that parents and other family members are dealing with all the time. So I can imagine that this book might be a real source of support for them.
I would hope so. You know what I mean? I would hope so.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because in The Man Who Had No Tears, Midnight, because she only deals with children, usually he has to become a child again and go back and find the root of, you know, the trauma that happened to him that made him lose his tears. And I want people to buy this book and read it so you don't have to tell the whole story, but he does discover, and we discover as we read it, that it's around something that happened to his mother.
Mm-hmm.
And then his father's reaction to what happened to his mother. And when the mother was speaking, that's where I started feeling like this is really an allegory for slavery.
Yeah.
So when you started thinking, I do want to know a little bit about your process. When you start thinking about these stories, which comes first for you, the allegory or the visualizing the place, the people? What is your process for creating this whole different universe that, of course, feels very familiar in some ways?
Usually I start with the story. And the story somehow represents a person that I love dearly, a retelling of something that is universal that they struggle with. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And with The Man Who Had No Tears, you know how when you teach, you always all the children are your babies, but you get one that's like, this is my little baby. If I could take this one home, I would take this one home.
Yes. Yes.
So I had a boy in my class who was very much like that. He even looked like he could be my son. I was just like, you look like you could be my baby. And he was just like, you know, ping pong, ping. He was just all over the place. And the person that I was dating at the time, he looked like him too. Like it really looked like it could have been our son.
Wow.
And the person I was dating at the time was really stunted in their ability to express feelings and to feel safe around the expression of feelings, and to acknowledge that he had deep feelings. It meant weakness. And so a lot of the ways that he would express his frustration or his sadness or his grief would be through bullying. And we didn't make it because I totally cannot be bullied. I mean, this is way too much, buddy. You have to find another way to like process. And he was just like, no. And I was like, okay, well. So, but I was noticing that there were a lot of men that I knew, like when I was in that dating age, that was the way that they processed.
Mm.
Was just like hyper masculinity, big bravado. And behind that, very damaged.
Mm-hmm.
And not allowed to have many tools to express usually a lot of trauma. I mean, like a considerable amount of like, that's too much, dude. That's too much. You're going to have to take up like pottery, or like, you're going to have to find some kind of outlet if you're not going to go to therapy, man. Wood whittling, I don't know, but you're going to have to find an outlet for this.
Right. Well, it's so funny though, because this book, even as I'm thinking about like, okay, when this man becomes a little boy again, what he remembers is a recurring dream that he had. And the recurring dream just sort of broke my heart, you know, because of the point of where he would wake up in the dream. Oh, it just, so I don't want to give too much away, but it was one of those things. And we've all had dreams like this where something so wonderful is about to happen to you. And every time it's about to happen and you wake up.
Yes. Yeah. I actually cried a lot writing this book.
I can imagine. It was very, because you're working with the feelings of children, especially because this man had to become a child again to heal. It's very hard. It's very hard when you're reading it. And I actually, by the time you wrote this book, my children were beyond the age of being read to. But I was thinking to myself, wow, how would they have taken this book? I think they would have loved it if I had been reading it. Mm-hmm. But it's one of those things that, you know, allegory for kids goes in really deep. Yeah.
My initial, even though like the publishing world doesn't work like this, the way that I initially thought like these stories are supposed to be a family read. It's supposed to be like around the fire and the parent is reading this world to the child and doing the voices, you know, the way that I was read to.
Yeah.
As a child. So that was how I envisioned these stories coming about, that they were family stories and not just for the young reader.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And when I read it too, I feel like that there was, you know, it's not that kind of, you know, they have the graded readers where like the vocabulary and this and that is sort of geared towards a younger, that emerging reader, or then the next step, which I'm not sure is the next step, but it doesn't read like that type of story. It does read like something that an adult should read to a child or with their child.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I didn't know how to market that or how to make that fit in, you know, when I was like shopping it around. I didn't know how to do that. And so I was just like, I'm just going to do it myself because I don't know how to do, I don't know.
Yeah, but how has that worked out? Have you been able to present it in such a way of like, hey, parents, grandparents, aunts and uncles, read this to your child?
Not so much. What I used to do was, I used to do a story time called Dark 30. And it was like right at dusk. It was like 6:30, like right when the sun was going down.
Yeah.
And I would invite families to come. And I would make like this like big vegan dinners, but we would have like cornbread and greens and rice and some kind of like red beans or black eyed peas or something. And, you could just eat till you, and then I would have I would read some of the midnight stories, or I would read other picture books.
Wow.
And then sometimes we would watch a movie like The Wiz or something like that if they wanted to stay later.
Yeah.
But it was just it was family time. I wanted to create family time. So I think that was always my goal, was to create community around the books. Now I am thinking about how do I revisit this in a way that makes sense. And that's still something I'm unfolding, how they could proliferate a little bit more than I have the capacity to do as one person.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, these are stories that are meant to be read out loud. Yeah. They're not meant to be.
Yeah. Yeah. And they're also meant to have some pauses where you kind of just digest what you just read.
Mm-hmm.
You have another book. So tell me about this other book that you have written.
So I would say maybe a few years ago, I decided to be transparent about having lupus and rheumatoid arthritis, so overlap autoimmune conditions. I had tried to hide it for a long time, or try not to have it public. Only a few people knew that I was experiencing it. And it was challenging because I was acting like I didn't have it. So my then partner at the time did not understand that it was something that really impacted me. So I'm doing all of these things to seem like a normal partner. I'm overcompensating. I'm trying to make up for the fact that I experienced some physical limitations. And by the time we ended things, my body was just tired. And so the idea was to just write about it. And I had decided soon after to do my first lupus walk. And the thing about it was I couldn't really walk that far.
So how far is the lupus walk?
I think at the time it was like a 2K or 3K walk. I don't know kilometers, but but it was like a K walk. One of those.
Yeah.
And I actually required a walker at that time. And so it was really about me allowing myself to be seen using a walker. And I had the full support of my family and my friends, and, really began to accept the fact that there were things that were very challenging for me to do. It was okay that if I didn't do them. And I think that began a long road of self-discovery and self-compassion that I've been spending a good 10 years building now, just how to be compassionate and loving and kind to myself, and how do I extend that to others.
And the name of your book is Loving Myself with Lupus.
Yes, it's in a journal format, of just kind of like me talking about preparing for the walk itself.
Yeah.
And noticing things and giving myself little exercises, things like that. And then it was supposed to be, the subsequent volumes were supposed to talk about like having joints replaced. I've had 2 joints replaced.
Wow.
And, losing partial eyesight for 8 months. Like I was legally blind for 8 months.
Wow.
And just, I was like, I'm just going to write these kids' books.
But, this doesn't have to do with writing, but you did go to Chile.
I did. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. I did. I went to, I'm so fortunate to I have been trying to get my master's degree since, I want to say, 1998. I have been trying to get that thing together. And so I would try all these different schools, but every time I would have some flare and I'd have to drop out of school, every single time.
Right.
So I found a low res program with Spalding University, and it was a creative writing program, and you could focus on children's and young adult writing.
Wow.
And you only had to go for 10 days at a time. You did a 10-day residency, and the rest of the time you were at home.
Wow.
And they offered summer international travel. And I was like, I'm going to go to this school.
Wow.
And then I got there, and then the one time I was able to travel, I had to stop going there several times. I had to stop because I was like, I'm having flares. But they said, you get 10 years to complete this degree.
Wow.
And so I was starting to feel good enough to travel.
Yeah.
And I had gotten a little scooter, like a mobility scooter.
Yeah.
And I was, they made accommodations, and I went on my first international trip. It was really cool, to Chile, Santiago, Chile. And I wrote and had a really good time and was very supported by the Spalding community. So
that's so fantastic. I remember the pictures from your trip that you were posting in Facebook. It looked really, really cool.
Yeah, we went to Pablo Neruda's house.
Oh, wow.
Yes, several houses there that they've turned into museums and things like that. And just seeing that and his work, and it was really awesome.
Ah, that's so nice. Well, Tiffany, if people want to find out more about your books and order some books, where should they look?
They can look at Midnight Story Series. That's MidnightStorieSeries.com. Or they can also find them on Amazon. You can find Midnight and the Man Who Had No Tears, or Midnight and Little Girl Blue.
Mm.
And you'll be able to find the coloring books there. They're accompanying coloring books.
Oh, nice.
And yes, and I'm on, Midnight Story Series is on, there's a Facebook page, so you can check that out as well.
That's wonderful. Well, it was so great to catch up with you and to get more of the background of these books, which I really, really love the Midnight character, and to hear about your other book, Loving Myself with Lupus. And very excited about how this career pivot worked out for you.
Thank you. I also want to just thank Adolfo for his beautiful work and the wonderful illustrations that he has brought Midnight and the whole world of Sheena to life, and
yes,
it's a joy to work with.
Yeah.
And thank you for having me. I really appreciate getting to see you and catch up.
Yeah.
And
yes.
having you interested in my work. It just means a lot.
Well, it was such a pleasure. You're listening to Art Heals All Wounds. Remember to be in touch on my Facebook page, Art Heals All Wounds, and also on Twitter and Instagram at Art Heals Podcast. Thanks so much to Tiffany Golden for joining me on this episode and sharing her inspiration behind the Midnight Story series. If you want to learn more about Tiffany's work and find copies of the Midnight Story series, go to midnightstoryseries.net. That's midghtstorysseries.net. The music you've heard in this podcast is Yellow Light District and Otto Waschenlage Instrumental by Lobo Loco. Beethoven's Piano Sonata No. 15 in D major was performed by Karina Galanian.